Okay, so today we're going to cover what needs to happen on a big truck check with a vent master or after use. Anytime the vent master gets used on scene, then basically a big truck check needs to occur just to make sure that it's ready for the next shift. This vent master is different from other vent masters out there. There are several models out there in operations. The processes are the same though. There may be slight differences in how things disassemble, but the process doesn't change. Okay. So the first thing I'll do is set up my workspace, take a piece of cardboard and lay it down because I'm going to be spraying some degreaser and brake cleaner. I want a way to kind of soak that up and not just have a surface there. Get together the basic tools I need. I got my flathead scrunch. I got a wire brush. I got any Allen wrenches I may or may not need depending on the saw. I've got an air chuck and some compressed air, right? Every station's kind of got their different ways of getting those tools, but those are the things I need to have handy, as well as my rags, a big orange cleaner, my brake clean, and my silicone. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do with the saw is get rid of the parts I don't want to deal with first. So I'm going to go ahead and take off the bar and chain and the cover. As you can see, it's pretty dirty in there, right? Doesn't look unlike how a chainsaw should look. But it's not clean, and this saw has been used recently, so this is my chance to kind of clean it up and make sure that there's nothing wrong with it. So I'll set this aside, as well as the bar and chain. Now I take it off and I just leave it assembled. I'm going to set it out of my way and move on with the rest of the saw. Alright, so I disassembled the bar and chain and removed the cover, and as you can see in here, there's like some insulation fibers and just general grime and grit. Nothing looks terribly bad right now, but it just still needs to be clean before I can inspect it and just make sure that everything's okay. All right, so that's where I'm done with that for now. I'm going to save the cleanup work for just a moment. Now I'm going to move on to the top of the saw. We're just going to disassemble the saw a little bit further. I'll go ahead and remove the air filter cover, kind of take a look inside here and see what I've got. So already I can look at my air filter and see that it's pretty brown, right? It starts off yellow or whitish, and as the air intake works, you know, it catches grime and grit in there. So this is in pretty bad shape. It needs to be replaced. These paper filters can only be cleaned if it's like sawdust that you're blowing out with compressed air. This is going to need to be replaced. So I need to remove this to further disassemble the saw, starting on the top with my Allen wrench. Each saw is a little bit different. It's worth noting that my carburetor throat is exposed, and you can see my choke inside there. So when I pull the choke, it closes that butterfly valve. So that's somewhat protective of the inner workings of the saw. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that choke to protect it a little bit. And to further protect it, once I get this other cover off, I'll put a cotton rag over it. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to the other protective cover here. Just a little bit dirty, no big deal, but while we've got it off, we're going to go ahead and clean that as well. So I'll set it aside, and this is my chance to kind of inspect what's inside here. So like I mentioned, we take this clean cotton rag and just kind of stuff it down the throat of the carburetor so that as I'm inspecting it, I don't drop any little pieces of grit or metal down there to get sucked into the chamber. Okay? If you'll notice, right around the spark plug hole, this is built up with a little bit of grime here. And I'm kind of gently scraping it with this flathead screwdriver. So these are the fins of the cylinder. and their job is to dissipate heat. It's an air-cooled motor. So as the piston pumps up and down inside the cylinder, creates heat and friction which needs to go somewhere. So these fins, if they're coated in this black tar, roofing tar and sawdust, whatever it may be, it doesn't dissipate heat as well. So you can overheat the engine and total the saw. So that's why we're going to address some of this stuff. So for now I'm just kind of inspecting it. I'm looking down inside of here and seeing that it's in need of some cleaning. Okay, this saw has seen a little bit of work recently, and it just needs to get cleaned up. I'm also just kind of taking a general look around my linkage and seeing what kind of shape everything is in. These hoses, they direct fuel to where it's coming from and needs to go. Just kind of taking a little look at them, making sure they're not cracked or leaking, anything like that. Making sure that my choke hardware and linkage is working as appropriate. That's my basic inspection of the carburetor. We're not going to get into making any carburetor adjustments or anything. We're just going to say it's all working for now, and we'll move on with our cleaning process. So for now, I'm still going to leave my spark plug in place just because it protects that cylinder. The same reason that I've plugged my carburetor throat. And I'm going to move on to further disassembling the saw. So I'm going to move on to the top, the side of the saw here, where my pull handle is. This is my pull cord, and we'll get to this in a minute. We'll get to inspection and cleaning of that part. For now, I'm going to set it aside with the other parts. So now, what we can see is a bunch of grime, right? So all this dirt, grime, and grease can build up in places that I don't want and cause a problem, right? One of those places is right here. This is my coil. So when I start this engine, this rotates here, a magnet passes by the coil and it makes my electric spark. So if this is gunked up down in here, then it's not going to make a spark. So I need to better expose it so I can clean it. I've got a plastic cover here. My spark plug wire and my ignition switch here, I can just loosen these up out of this cover. It's best that we don't remove those. Some of them are attached permanently to the coil, right? So if I were to pry this spark plug wire, you can see it comes here from the plug down to here. If I were to pry this loose, on some saws it would put it out of service. It would be broken. So it's best not to disconnect that. Let's leave that to shops. Other saws will allow you to pop it off. I can't tell you which one is which, so it's best to leave that alone. We're going to go ahead and just lift it out of this cover just to get the clearance we need to remove this component. As with all of this stuff, we just need to remember that we shouldn't force anything. If you force something, something's wrong. It's going to break, right? So take it easy and just kind of move slowly. So, can you get down in here? You see it? So my magnet's right here. You can see my screwdriver sticks to it. When this magnet passes by my coil right here, there's got to be the right amount of clearance between those two parts to make electricity. And if grime builds up in there, then I don't have that clearance and I don't make electricity. If I don't make electricity, the saw doesn't go. It's as simple as that. Alright, so my saw is pretty well exposed now. I have it opened up on 3 sides, and I'm ready to kind of just do a general cleaning of the saw so that I can better inspect components individually. So the first thing I'm going to do is just take a rag and start wiping the big stuff away. Next, I'm going to hook up my compressed air and I'm going to blow out what I can. Okay, so once we have done a mass decon and kind of blown away what we can with the rag and compressed air, we'll move on to some degreaser. Again, our spark plug is still in its hole, and our throat to our carb is obstructed both with the choke as well as a rag. Okay, so we'll spray it down with some Big Orange here. Kind of get it soaking on there. This stuff takes a few minutes to get to working, so we'll spray everywhere we can and let it sit for a minute. So at this point, the saw's been sprayed down and scrubbed a little bit. The degreaser's done a pretty good job. As you can see down here, brought a bunch of tar and debris and grease out of the saw. So the next thing is that I need to get this further cleaned. The brake cleaner helps push all of that degreaser and debris off of the saw and then onto this cardboard. So again, I'm making sure that the throat of my carb is obstructed. I still got my spark plug in, and I'm ready to use my brake wash. You need to be careful where you're using this because it's pretty nasty stuff. You don't want to get it into your eyes or on the paint of a vehicle. It'll remove paint pretty easily off of a lot of metals, so try and steer clear of it. Also, don't use more than you have to around rubber components because it does degrade these over time. So now we're going to move on to inspecting our spark plug. So we'll remove the spark plug wire, take my scrunch, loosen up this plug. I'm kind of watching as I'm doing this, making sure that there's not any debris that I've missed falling down into the cylinder. Okay, my spark plug here doesn't look too bad. It's not really fouled, it's not burnt white, it's not solid black. This is fair. This is a fair plug. If it was fouled, if it had a bunch of black soot on it, I could just take my wire brush, brush it away, clean it up a little bit, and then I'll check my gap. So I've got a little gap tool here, and insert it here, and see that I'm somewhere around 0.025. That's the gap we're running on these. Once I'm good with that, I can go ahead and put it back in to protect the cylinder. Over here, I mentioned the coil earlier. I want to make sure that I've got decent clearance. Now that it's clean, I can see what's going on inside here. That I can see as this magnet passes by my coil that I have the correct amount of clearance, right? And one way to check is to take about a business card, this is a repair tag, and see how it fits in between these two. And this one just fits, right? So there's an adjustment that can be made for this. If you're troubleshooting your saw and you don't have a spark, this is one way you can look to see if you can correct that, if you're comfortable doing that. Otherwise, if you're not, just contact shops and they'll be glad to help you out. So I'll just make sure that this card fits in between the magnet and the coil, okay? While I'm here, I'm just going to go ahead and wipe down a little bit more, kind of inspect things, see that everything looks about right, okay? This is a good time for me to check all my nuts and bolts and just make sure that they're tight. These are things that we don't see on a daily check, so it's the right time for us to kind of inspect and make sure that they're good. So something I can check on this side is just to check and make sure that my chain brake is actually working. See that the sprocket spins freely. I bump my chain brake and it doesn't turn, so I know that that's working properly. Okay, so once that's done, my saw's clean, right? So I can set this aside and move on to the other components.